Welcome to Confessing the Faith, a theological and devotional walk through the 1689 Baptist Confession of Faith. I am your host, Sam Waldron, pastor of Grace Reformed Baptist Church in Owensboro, Kentucky, and the president of Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary. Today, we will once more be considering the subject of God's decree as it is described in chapter 3 of the 1689. We have been discussing the doctrine of God's eternal decree found in paragraphs 1 and 2 of this chapter, and today we come to paragraph 2, which says, quote, "Although God knoweth whatsoever may or can come to pass upon all supposed conditions, yet hath he not decreed anything because he foresaw it as future, or as that which would come to pass upon such conditions." Paragraph 1 dealt with the fact that the decree is absolutely universal. This paragraph deals with the fact that the decree is absolutely unconditional. How do we know this? Well, there are three straightforward arguments for the fact that God's decree is unconditional, not conditioned by anything outside of himself. And first is the nature of the situation, if I can put it that way. No one was there, nothing existed when God decreed. Hence, God took nothing into consideration except his own will when he decreed all things. To say anything else is to fall into the catastrophic and anti-God view of an eternal dualism. The second reason we know that the decree is absolutely unconditional is the plain assertion of Scripture. Scripture asserts that no one counseled God when he decreed. It says this in many places, Isaiah 40, Romans 11, 1 Corinthians 2. But let me quote Isaiah 40, 13 and 14. "Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has informed him? With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding? And who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding?" The third argument for the unconditional character of God's decree is the inference of its universality. We have proved in previous talks that God's decree is absolutely universal or comprehensive. It concerns whatever comes to pass. The decree determines all things, but if it determines all things, then it can be determined by none of those things which it determines. I think that should be clear. God foreknows the future comprehensively and certainly. The Arminian is right when he says that foreknowledge does not by itself make the future certain. But divine foreknowledge does assume that the future is comprehensively certain. It cannot be known as certain in the way that God knows it, unless it is comprehensively certain. So we ask the Arminian to think a little more deeply and ask this question. So, foreknowledge by itself does not make the future comprehensively certain. What does? What is that something that makes the future comprehensively certain? The only possible answer, the only Christian answer, is that God does so by his eternal decree. Foreknowledge is possible because God's decree is universal and unconditional. The connection is stated clearly in Isaiah 46, 10 and 11, declaring the end from the beginning. There's God's foreknowledge. And from ancient times, things which have not been done. Again, there's God's foreknowledge. Saying, and how is this foreknowledge explained? My purpose will be established, and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. It is because the future is established by God's purpose, by his good pleasure, that God can show the end from the beginning. Calling a bird of prey, the text goes on to say in verse 11, from the east, the man of my purpose from a far country. Truly I have spoken, truly I will bring it to pass. I have planned it, surely I will do it. So when God foresees the future, when God prophesies the future, he can do that because He is the one, on the basis of his eternal decree, bringing it to pass. Yes, we worship a God who knows the future comprehensively and completely. That is because, and it can only be because, he planned it comprehensively and completely. Nothing surprises him. Nothing takes him off guard, and thus his people may trust him completely with their futures. Also, his enemies must be in terror of this God who knows, because he has planned, their future punishment from all eternity.